part 3 of the Spirit Child, Tessa Lamar novels, Book 3. Written by Kathryn M. Hearst. Narrated by Holly Adams. Be sure to subscribe to Kathryn's channel where you can find part 4 of this audiobook, along with more of Kathryn's paranormal and contemporary romance novels.
Chapter 27. My butt hit the couch at 9:30 p.m., though my feet would have sworn it was much later. I'd listened to plenty of mothers complain of having no time for themselves, little sleep, and a constant level of stress, but I'd blown it off as an exaggerated cry for help. Boy, was I wrong, unless it was a cry for help with the housework. Bryson plopped down beside me.
I think she fell asleep before I turned out the light.
It's been a long day. I glanced around for the remote and found it on the end table, 2 feet from me. Reaching for it would require more energy than I had. Besides, TV was overrated.
That it has.
He patted his lap, signaling me to give him my poor aching feet.
What happened in Dr. Alexander's office?
My goodness, was that really just a few hours ago? I stretched out on the couch and settled in to enjoy the foot massage.
Afraid so. I didn't want to bring it up in front of Jojo.
He set to work, rubbing and kneading until I groaned. By the time I'd caught him up to speed on the events of the day, I wanted to crawl into bed and sleep until noon. You're really good with her. The statement earned me a rare, bashful grin. I've been thinking. I sat upright and grabbed his hand. Maybe we should...
Hold that thought. Aaron's here.
Oh, no. Jolene was sound asleep, but she had a habit of waking up at the worst times. Plus, Christina didn't sleep. She would know Aaron had stopped by. Technically, I hadn't broken the promise. She said she didn't want Aaron near Jolene. Different rooms after hours might not count.
It'll be okay.
Bryson squeezed my shoulder. I hadn't heard his car outside, nor had the Firebird sensed him. Fatigue and stress could do that to a girl. Bryson opened the front door before the third in our trio had a chance to knock. Wrinkled clothes and stubbled jaw that had gone way past 5 o'clock shadow, Aaron looked like he hadn't slept in a week.
Hey, is the coast clear?
Yep, she's asleep. I scooted over to give him room to sit. Have you had supper? He ran his hand over the back of his neck.
Does a burger in a cardboard box count?
Absolutely not. Tired or not, I sprang to my feet, determined to get some food into him. Venison chili or leftover beef stew?
Chili would be great.
Aaron sank into a chair.
And a beer. Rough day.
Bryson grabbed 2 beers from the fridge while I heated Aaron's dinner.
The case. Nothing's adding up. I dug into Wagner's background and found a blue Toyota Camry registered in his name, but he's not the guy who killed...
He glanced around the room.
Where's the ghost?
Probably listening.
Great.
Aaron sipped his beer.
I remember the perp in the Hayes case. It wasn't Wagner. I pulled old DMV photos and his high school yearbook. Not the same man.
I thought back to what the spirit had said about the killer. Could there be 2 perps?
Honey, your guess is as good as mine. Hopefully we'll know more when the lab results come back.
He sighed.
Any chance I can have a chat with Christina Hayes?
I said, I guess. But Bryson said,
No.
Aaron glanced between us.
Jolene spoke today. She had a disagreement with TJ, and Christina didn't take over. She's keeping her word, and Jolene's making progress.
Bryson turned to me, likely for backup. I hated being the tiebreaker, especially when I could see the merits of both sides. Maybe we could speak to Christina without involving Jolene or breaking our promise.
If you can do that, go for it.
Aaron scratched his head.
What about separating Jolene from the spirit? Permanently? We have to teach JoJo to fend for herself against the ghosts.
Bryson's frown deepened.
The problem is, I can't see them. Couldn't you make an amulet to keep them away from her? I haven't had a ghost grab my spine since I've been wearing it.
Aaron finished his beer and came into the kitchen for another.
I'll give it some thought.
Aaron kissed my cheek before leaning in to smell the chili. It's almost ready. Go wash up. I hip-checked him.
Yes, ma'am.
He swatted my backside on his way out of the kitchen. Questions and spells running through my head, I popped day-old cornbread into the microwave and set the butter dish on the table. The thought of using magic on Jolene made my stomach hurt. I hate the idea.
Me too.
Bryson followed Aaron into the kitchen.
Why?
Aaron filled his bowl and sat.
She puts on a necklace, the ghosts can't feed off her, and we send Christina to the great beyond.
Amulets are a short-term fix. If she takes it off, she's still vulnerable. I set the cornbread in front of him. Besides, it's not that easy. JoJo doesn't want Christina to go. And she trusts us. I won't do anything that could change that. Aaron swallowed a huge bite and shook his head.
She's a kid. They're resilient. Think about the kids this guy will kill if we don't catch him.
I pressed my hand to my belly, a gesture I'd seen Haley and my mother do 1,000,000 times since becoming pregnant. While I was most certainly not expecting a baby, his words cut deep. You don't get it. You don't know her. She's not one of 1,000,000. She's one in 1,000,000. Aaron stopped chewing and met my eyes.
You're attached.
I am. I think I want to keep her. In fact, I think I want her to have a little brother or sister or one of each. Bryson grabbed my hand and pulled me into his lap.
Yeah?
Yes. Tears prickled my eyes, though I laughed. The way he looked at me warmed cold places that I hadn't realized existed. I'd never felt more loved than in that moment, discussing starting a family with my men. My men. 2 of them. One squeezed me tight enough to crack a rib, but the other had gone quiet. I turned to find Aaron pale-faced and staring.
You okay, man?
Bryson, still grinning, nodded at him.
You two seriously want to discuss having kids? Now?
He pushed back from the table. Not right this minute. I eased away from Bryson. I thought you wanted kids?
I did. I do. Hell, I don't know.
He stared at his half-eaten bowl of chili.
I can't imagine bringing a baby into this fucked up world.
Aaron cussed now and then, but I don't think I'd ever heard him drop an F-bomb, outside of dirty talk, that is.
Sorry.
He took his dishes to the sink.
It's been a hell of a day. Must be something in the air,
Bryson said. Aaron rubbed the stubble on his jaw, the same way he did when he'd thought of something awful and debated how to phrase it. Oh, for Pete's sake, what? He dropped his hand.
You can't adopt a kid without parental consent.
I forgot to tell you. The social worker called. The DNA tests came back. The soldier isn't her daddy. Since her mother is gone, we have no hope of finding her biological father. The blood drained from Aaron's face, but Bryson's grin widened. We were in trouble. Big trouble, with a capital T and a cherry on top kind of trouble. We should curl up in bed and watch a movie. As soon as the words came out of my mouth, I remembered Jolene. She knew about the guys, but she could talk now. What would happen if she said something in front of the social worker? Heck, how would we ever pass the application process needed to adopt her? I was pretty sure the state of Florida would frown on a threesome.
That sounds great.
Aaron sounded less than convinced. In fact, he sounded downright defeated. Maybe we shouldn't. I mean, Jolene could wake. He held up a hand.
I should go. I have to be back at the station in a few hours.
I turned to Bryson for help, but he appeared as dumbfounded as me.
What's this?
Aaron snatched one of Jolene's drawings from the sideboard. Eyes wide, he dropped the sketch on the table and stared as if it might jump up and assault him.
Jojo drew it this morning,
Bryson said.
There's another one in the studio. Of this man?
Aaron's voice rose. Bryson nodded. Do you recognize him? I turned to the paper to get a better look. Aaron whispered,
It's a perfect likeness to the man who kidnapped and killed Christina Hayes. I'll never forget his face.
Chapter 28. I stared out the kitchen window while washing the dishes, or went through the motions. Bryson and Aaron had walked outside to Charlie's old workshop. Bryson had converted it into an art studio after he moved into the house. I would have gone with them, except I didn't want Jolene to wake up to an empty house. Besides, I needed a few minutes to clear my head. Aaron didn't want to have children. Sure, he could change his mind in a year or two, or after the case, or even after getting a good night's sleep, but what if he didn't? He hadn't seemed overly enthused with the idea of adopting Jolene either. I couldn't help but worry what it would mean to our relationship if the guys were on opposite sides of the let's start a family argument. This issue didn't exactly lend itself to compromise. My cell phone rang and I glanced at the clock. 11 p.m. It was either the station or urgent for someone to call at this hour. Hello? Scott's voice came over the line.
Hi, Tessa. It's Aiden Scott. He's sick. Back in the hospital. Haley's a wreck.
My breath left my lungs like 100-pound weight had landed on my chest. Where are you?
Florida Hospital, downtown. Can you come?
I'm on my way. I'll call Grandma from the car and have her call the prayer warriors. The ladies' group from the church thought of themselves as soldiers of the Lord, thus the name. I knew Scott and Haley didn't believe in God, but that didn't mean he didn't believe in them.
Thanks, Tessa. We'll take all the help we can get. We're in the NICU. I'll meet you in the waiting room.
Scott disconnected. I ran to the back door and hollered for Bryson and Aaron. They must have heard the alarm in my voice because they sprinted back to the house. Scott called, It's the baby. He's back in the NICU. I grabbed my keys from the hook. I have to go. You two stay here with Jolene.
Shoes.
Bryson pointed to my bare feet. Right. I slid into an old pair of flip-flops I kept near the door to run back and forth to Grandma's. Aaron set his hand on my shoulder.
You're too keyed up to drive. I'll go with you.
The man looked like an extra from Night of the Living Dead. He seriously needed a good night's sleep. You're exhausted. I'll drive myself. Bryson gave me a hard look, and I knew I wouldn't be driving myself to the hospital.
I have to stay with Jolene. Let Aaron take you.
I turned to the detective. Fine, whatever. But you're going to drop me off and go straight home to bed. I'll get a cab or call pick-me-up when I'm ready to go. Aaron's expression told me I wouldn't be getting a cab or calling a rideshare home. I threw my hands up. It's a good thing y'all are hot because you're serious pains in the butt. Aaron slid into the driver's seat of my little sports car and revved the engine.
Did Scott say what's wrong?
No, but it sounds serious. I clicked my seatbelt and called Grandma's house. Dottie answered on the second ring. "Tessa, where are you headed this time of night?" Surprised to find her awake, I said, "Why are you up?" "Malcolm is holding on the other line." She sounded like she'd gotten caught stealing candy, and she had. "It's Haley's baby. They're back at the hospital in the NICU. I don't know what's happened, but tell him he needs to get there." Aaron gave me a weird look. As a rule, I never sassed my aunt. Oh, dear. I'll tell him. I chided myself for being rude. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be gruff. I'm worried, is all. Can you call the prayer warriors and put them to work?" "Yes, of course. I'll let Malcolm know." She disconnected.
What was that about?
Aaron downshifted to pass a slow-moving truck. I gripped the "oh shit" handle above the window to keep myself from sliding across the console and into his lap. "Dottie and Haley's father are sweet on each other."
And that bothers you?
He hit the gas and ran through the gears. "Take it easy on my clutch." I motioned to the speedometer. "And slow down. You're going to get us pulled over." He eased off the gas.
Stop avoiding the question.
"Yes, it bothers me. Charlie's still around. I mean, his spirit is, anyway." I heard the whine in my voice and sighed. I know, it's silly, but I don't like it. Plus, he's Jolene's therapist and she's his patient's foster mother. There's all sorts of wrong with that situation. He gave me a "you've got to be kidding" look. Hey, I didn't say I wasn't a hypocrite.
Awareness is the first step to recovery.
Aaron chuckled. Time to change the subject. "You didn't seem overjoyed at the prospect of adopting Jolene." Aaron clenched his jaw.
You took me by surprise.
I shifted to face him. "Nuh-uh. There's more to it than that. Talk to me." He kept his eyes on the road.
I have nothing against Jolene Parks or adoption.
I waited for him to finish his thought. When it became clear he had no intention of doing so, I said, "But?"
But I don't want to see you and Bryson get hurt. You're already too attached. What happens if you can't keep her?
Yes, the thought had occurred to me, but I hadn't let myself go down that road. "I'll be disappointed, but I'll deal with it." He turned his head and studied my face so long, I worried he'd wreck my car. "Eyes on the road." Aaron adjusted his grip on the steering wheel.
I thought we'd have more time with just the three of us before we worried about kids. I'm not ready to be a father.
Ah, now we were getting somewhere. I ran my hand over his shoulder. "It's not like I'm already pregnant. We can wait a year or so. Besides, it takes 9 months to bake a baby, and Lord knows how long of trying before we'd even conceive." His muscles bunched under my fingers.
Thank you, Dr. Ruth.
I loved Aaron. I did. But he could be a jerk when he was tired or hungry or hurt. I supposed most people could. However, I wasn't in a relationship with most people. I pulled away and faced forward. I spent the remainder of the drive staring out the windshield, trying to figure out what had crawled up his butt. Aaron parked the car in the garage, and we speed-walked into the building and took the elevators to the 5th floor. The beauty of the facility offered little respite from the ball of anxiety forming in my gut. "Give me a minute." I slipped into the empty waiting room and stared at the enormous plastic butterflies decorating the walls. Beneath them sat a miniature kitchen, short table, and a handful of cushioned stools. It broke my heart to imagine big brothers and sisters playing there while their new siblings fought for their lives yards away. Aaron turned me to face him. Without a word, he drew me into an embrace. My anger ebbed, replaced with a familiar fear that our relationship would unravel like an unbound braid, each piece twisting and turning until it separated from the whole. Malcolm Alexander's voice broke the silence.
Tessa, what's happened?
Chapter 29. I was no stranger to hospital rooms, but Aiden Scott's NICU suite was something entirely different. A space-age-looking bassinet replaced the typical patient bed. A metal tree-like structure held a monitor and tubes and bags and things I had no words for in its rotating arms. Haley sat in a plastic chair, staring at the tiny infant. She glanced up for a millisecond, saw me, and burst into tears. "He's very sick." I took one step, and she closed the distance. Haley clung to me while sobbing out words like infection, sepsis, respiratory distress, blue fever. I got the gist. The baby was indeed very sick. Words failed me. Platitudes like, "I'm sorry, he'll get better, you have to be strong for him," crossed my mind, and were quickly dismissed. In the end, I settled on the one thing I longed to hear when I'd lost Charlie. "I'm here for you. Anything you need, even if it's only to sit and hold your hand. Thanks. Scott's great, but he's in fix-it mode." She blew her nose. "I can't reach my dad. I got a message to him. He's in the waiting room with Scott and Aaron." I turned to the baby and tried to make sense of the wires and tubes stuck to or inside his little body. "Does he look blue to you? I told the nurses he still looked blue, but they said his O2 was getting better." Between the tiny cap and gown, not much of the newborn skin showed, but he did have a blue tinge, especially his hands and feet. "Yes, he does." She glanced from me to the baby and nodded. "The doctors are stone-faced. They put him on antibiotics and the ventilator to help him breathe. Said to wait and see how he responds. We'll know more tomorrow." "Have you eaten?" Lame question, but once again I didn't know what to say. Haley sank into the chair and rested her hand on the bassinet. "The nurses brought me a sandwich earlier." That was new, but then again I'd read an article about the children's hospital. The designers had gone above and beyond to make it a kid and parent-friendly space. We settled into a heavy silence. Not the awkward silence of two people with nothing to say to each other. The weight of this silence came from mutual fear and helplessness. A nurse entered the room, offered a nod, and went about her business of checking the baby's vitals and recording the information in the computer. Once finished, she turned to us and smiled. "Is there anything I can get either of you?" "No, ma'am." I returned her smile, though I imagined it looked as plastic as I felt. Haley said, "How are his oxygen levels? He's still blue." The nurse glanced at the screen. "His levels are good. Temp is still high. Blood pressure is coming down, which is a good sign. He's a fighter." Haley squared her shoulders and nodded. She might not feel like it, but Aiden Scott's mama was a fighter too. Malcolm came into the room, washed his hands, and went to his daughter. She stood, swayed, and crumpled into his arms. Rubbing her back and cradling her head against his shoulder, he stared at his grandchild. The normally calm man's face contorted in a pain that I could not begin to imagine. I stepped into the hall to pull myself together. They deserved a few moments of privacy, and I needed to reinforce my armor. I'd be no good for my friend if I fell apart too. I pulled my phone from my purse and called Bryson.
"Hey, how's the baby?"
His voice wrapped around me like a warm blanket. He's on antibiotics and a ventilator. He has sepsis. At least, I thought that was right. I hadn't wanted to press Haley too much about his official diagnosis.
How are you?
I shrugged, though he couldn't see me. I'm okay. How's Jolene?
She woke up and asked for a glass of water, then went back to sleep.
The tone of his voice sounded like a father, a proud father, who found delight in their children's coming and goings, no matter how mundane. I love you.
I love you too. I have it under control here. Stay as long as you need to.
He paused.
How was Aaron on the drive?
Cranky and very much against adoption and babies. I'd tried to sound flippant, but my darned voice cracked. He's afraid we'll be hurt if we can't keep her.
We will be. But I don't think that's what's bothering him.
Do you know what is?
I have my suspicions, but I'd rather the three of us sit down and talk. Speculating won't solve anything.
Malcolm poked his head out the door.
She's asking for you.
I nodded and held up a finger. I agree. I need to run. I'll call you if anything changes.
Focus on Haley and the baby. You know Aaron. He hates surprises. He just needs time to process his thoughts.
I guess. Good night.
Night.
He disconnected. I turned to Aiden Scott's room to find Haley, red-faced, puffy-eyed, and more exhausted than she was 5 minutes before. She pushed her hair from her face. Tessa, I hate to ask, but would you mind staying tonight? Oh, honey, of course. She motioned to her father. Dad's gonna take Scott home to get a shower and some sleep. Good. I didn't want to mention it, but he smelled when he hugged me earlier. My attempt at humor earned me a smile. I'll send Aaron home, too. He's been working crazy hours at the station. Malcolm clamped his hand on my shoulder.
Haley's car is here if you need to leave. I'll bring Scott back in the morning before the doctors do rounds.
I'll make sure she's taken care of herself. I had things I wanted to say to him, mostly an apology for acting like a brat about him and Dottie, but I needed to sort through my feelings. An all-nighter in the hospital would give me time to think.
Thanks, Tessa.
He paused as if he wanted to say more, but turned and left. I texted Bryson to let him know the plan while they said their goodbyes. A few minutes later, Scott trudged into the room and I slipped out to speak to Aaron. My detective slept sitting upright, head back, mouth open. I winced. He'd have a crick in his neck for sure. I touched his arm. Aaron? He opened his gorgeous blue eyes, looked around, and ran a hand over his head.
Yeah? Sorry, I dozed off.
I smoothed his dark hair. It had grown long in the last couple of weeks and had curled over his collar and ears. Sweetie, I'm going to stay here tonight with Haley. Why don't you go home and get some sleep? I'll get Dottie to pick me up in the morning. He shook his head.
No, I'm staying.
Stubborn man. Aaron, please listen to me. I'm going to be sitting with Haley for the next 5 or 6 hours. I'll feel better if one of us gets some rest. Besides, you have to be at the station bright and early.
You sure?
The hurt in his eyes confused me. I pressed my hands to his cheeks, leaned in and brushed my lips across his. Yes, I love that you want to stay, but I'll be okay. Let's plan for me to sleep at your place tomorrow night. It's been a while since we've had any alone time.
Sure. Sounds good.
He'd nodded and said the right thing, but he'd pulled away and erected a wall between us too tall for me to scale. Chapter 30. I paid the pick-me-up driver and dragged my tired butt into the house at 6 in the morning. It was dark, except for the light above the stove, which suited me fine. I knew the place like the back of my hand. I didn't need light to make my way to the bedroom. Or so I thought. I took a step and tripped over plastic grocery bags filled with rocks. Okay, maybe not rocks, but my toes couldn't tell the difference. In my sleep-deprived state, I reached for the wall to keep from tumbling forward, but I'd misjudged my location. My fingertips brushed the plaster. On my way down, I managed to bump into the coffee table and spill what I hoped was water. I sat in the dark room and mentally scanned my body for injuries. The only thing that hurt, besides my foot, was my pride. At least I'd managed to humiliate myself without an audience. Or so I thought. The overhead light came on. Bryson stood in the entryway, wearing pajama pants and a sleepy smile.
Are you okay?
I tripped.
I see that. How are Haley and the baby?
No change in Aiden Scott, but Haley slept a few hours. Not trusting my toes to work, I crawled onto the couch. Bryson grabbed a towel from the kitchen and mopped up the water.
I take it you didn't get any rest?
No, but it's all good. It gave me a chance to think. He paused mid-step on his way to the laundry.
About?
Aaron, mostly, but also the ghost situation and the murders. My words slurred like a drunk at closing time. He tossed the rag in the kitchen and returned to me.
Let's get you into bed. We'll talk when you're coherent.
I'll sleep here. Toes hurt. Too tired to move. Bryson slid one arm under my shoulders and the other under my knees and lifted me from the couch.
Jolene will be up in an hour or two.
I grumbled, but settled against his warm, muscular chest. Suddenly, bed seemed like a good idea. He smelled good, like fresh-cut lumber and spices and man. Want to fool around?
Tonight. We have a busy day. You need sleep more than orgasms.
I had that floaty sort of high feeling from pulling an all-nighter. Hearing the word orgasm made me giggle, which turned into full-blown laughter. I love it when you talk dirty. Say it again.
Did you stop off at the bar on the way home?
He stood me beside the bed and pulled my shirt over my head. I'm not drunk. Well, punch drunk, maybe. I shivered as he ran his hands down my sides and popped the button on my jeans. We really should start practicing conceiving. They say practice makes perfect. He peeled my jeans off and tossed them near the hamper.
That is true.
I slid my bra off and climbed into bed with Bryson right behind me. He kissed the corner of my mouth and continued to my neck. I tilted my head and closed my eyes. It felt so good, so amazingly good. The pillow, the blanket, the warm lips on my neck. I woke to the sound of voices in the living room. Male voices, one of which I did not recognize. I rolled over and gawked at the time. I'd slept until 1 in the afternoon. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done that. Probably the last time I stayed up all night. Now that I thought about it, I felt just as hungover. I pulled on a pair of sweats and a t-shirt and tiptoed toward the bathroom. I'd have to go into the hall to reach it, and needed to figure out where the men were in relation to the commode.
Thanks for dropping this off.
Bryson stood with his back to me with a paper sack in his hand. The stranger's eyes met mine, and I froze. Hi. A mere 4 feet from the bathroom, back teeth floating, my manners and my bladder warred. Bryson turned.
Sorry we woke you. Tessa, this is Pete. Pete, my fiancée, Tessa. She was at the hospital with a friend until 6 a.m. Nice to finally meet you. I knew your grandfather. I was real sorry to hear about his passing.
Pete offered his hand. I stepped forward and shook it. Thank you. It's nice to meet you, too. If you'll excuse me, I need to freshen up. The bathroom door closed behind me. What the heck? Jolene. It had to be. She'd preempted my turn in the John.
Well, I'll be going.
Pete nodded.
Think about what I said. The tribe needs you more than 1 day a week. I don't mind driving up from Tampa now and again, but I have my hands full on the rest.
Oh, boy. We had a lot to discuss already, but I added another item to the agenda. 2 items, if I counted speeding up the master bathroom renovations.
I'll speak to Tessa.
Bryson walked Pete outside. Jolene emerged from the bathroom. Hi, you finally up? I thought you might sleep all the way through my dance class. You're coming, right? To the class? Bryson said we'd go shopping after. I don't have any shoes except the ones a social worker gave me, and they're a little big. I grinned, remembering how excited I was to hear her speak. Now I really needed her to hush up. Give me 1 second. I need to use the potty. Okay. She followed me to the bathroom. Miss Tessa, what happened to my things? All my trophies and clothes were in my room when the police came. Do you think that police officer, Mr. Aaron, could get them for me? Oh, and I had a picture of my mama. I'd really like that. And one of my grandma. It was on the television stand. All my pageant dresses are there. I'm gonna need them for the Little Miss Sunshine Glitz Spectacular coming up in 2 weeks. Did Bryson tell you about that one? Just a minute, please. I'll be right out. I sat on the toilet trying desperately to wake up enough to follow the 9-year-old's train of thought. Her things were still at the trailer when Aaron and I visited, but the investigators had probably released the scene to the owners by now. I honestly had no idea what had happened to her stuff. The landlord may have boxed everything up, but, based on the condition of the trailer park, I highly doubted it. Okay, I'll be right here. The girl hummed, and from the sound of it, tap danced in the hall. I wanted a shower more than I wanted my next breath. Lord knew what kind of cooties I'd picked up in the hospital. My thoughts drifted to Haley and Aiden Scott, and then to Bryson tucking me into bed. Lord help me, I'd fallen asleep mid-kiss. Jolene continued to serenade me from the hall while I brushed my teeth and pulled my hair into a bun. I took a deep breath and opened the door. She cocked her head. I'd expected a barrage of questions, not scrutiny from a 9-year-old. I wiped any rogue toothpaste from the corners of my mouth. What's the matter? Do you know how to do a real bun? She motioned in the general direction of my head. Because that's not going to work for dance class. I think I can manage. Chapter 31. Defeated by 3 feet of slippery blonde hair, I'd retreated to the kitchen to caffeinate myself. I was a woman with unruly hair. A woman who had never actually tried to style another woman's hair, let alone a little girl who needed her behind duct taped to the ground in order to hold still. What's this? I opened the paper bag Pete had left behind. Bryson pulled a bobby pin from his mouth and secured Jolene's bun.
Rare herbs.
Assuming he planned to use said herbs in a spell, I dropped the subject and sipped my coffee. There was something about my big, strong man tending to the little girl's hair that made my insides turn gooey. Plus, He did a far better job with the bun than me. Pete wants you to reopen the shop? Bryson slid the final pin into the perfectly smooth bun and patted Jolene's shoulder.
You're all set. Go get changed for dance class.
She patted her head and flashed him a huge smile. Bryson and I wouldn't be the only ones disappointed if the adoption fell through. He stood and pulled me into an embrace.
He does, but it's not time. My priorities have changed. I sent word through the grapevine that I'd do 1 day a week at the tribal house. Otherwise, folks need to call Pete.
She has you wrapped around her finger already.
Something all of the women around here have in common.
He brushed his lips across mine.
You fell asleep on me last night.
I know. I'm sorry, Bryson whispered.
There's always tonight.
I remembered the promise I'd made to Aaron and sighed. I didn't not want to spend the night with him, but I worried we'd end up arguing about starting a family. I can't. I promised Aaron I'd...
Say no more.
He nuzzled into my neck.
He needs reassurance, and one of us has to stay with JoJo.
I'll see about getting Jolene's things from the trailer. The idea of facing Benjamin Wagner's ghost sent a shiver down my spine.
I don't want you going back there without me.
I won't. It's going to take all three of us to banish you-know-who. I'm hoping the landlord boxed up their things.
Maybe.
Bryson released me when Jolene returned to the room.
Don't forget, we have dinner at May's with Darlene and Stone.
Who's that? Jolene set her hands on her hips. I couldn't help but smile. She looked absolutely adorable in her dance clothes, like a tiny ballerina inside a jewelry box. Pink tights, leotard, and wrap skirt. Darlene's my mom, and Stone is her soon-to-be husband. Her brows drew together. But the woman in my picture is your mama? Oh, crap. Bryson set his hand on her shoulder.
Tessa has 2 mothers. Aunt Sheila died when Tessa was born. Darlene raised her.
The girl turned to me. You're adopted? My mind reeled with possible explanations, none of which would work. Bryson knelt and made eye contact with Jolene.
Not exactly. It is very complicated. Darlene doesn't know Tessa isn't her biological daughter. It would hurt her a great deal if she...
Her baby died and Charlie gave Tessa to Darlene. She glanced to her side, nodded, and said, It's a secret. I won't say anything. I hated secrets in a family, and I hated that more than likely my grandfather had whispered into her ear. The child needed to feel safe, not get caught up in dishonesty. Yes, but it's important you understand. We don't keep secrets in this house. You, me, and Bryson, we tell each other the truth, no matter what. Jolene nodded. He says he's sorry he didn't tell you before he died. My throat tightened, but instead of giving in to the overwhelming pain, I chose to hang on to my anger. I stiffened my spine and motioned to the door. We should get going or we'll be late. Jolene avoided my eyes when she took my hand. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other. I had to get to the SUV without crying. Once we were on the road and away from the memories of this place, I'd be fine. Bryson helped Jolene into the back seat and closed the door.
You okay?
Nope, but I will be. We drove in silence for the first few minutes, a deafening silence that ate at me like fire ants on a summer day. I turned on the radio and slipped through the stations. Oh, I love that one. Jolene clapped and belted out the lyrics to the old country song about friends in low places. The girl could sing. The pool hall favorite wouldn't earn me any Mother of the Year awards, but it took my mind off Charlie. Bryson nudged my side and joined in on the chorus. I sang along, although I was sure dogs 3 counties over howled when I hit the high notes. We arrived at the dance studio with 2 minutes to spare. The building resembled a high school gym. Not much to look at on the outside, but inside was another story. We entered a large parent waiting room with rows of leather chairs and several large-screen televisions on the walls. 10 or so women turned and stared. Some wore looks of shock, others anger, but they all gave Bryson a once-over. Jolene whispered, "You have to wait here. Parents aren't allowed in the studios, but you can watch me on the TV."
We'll be here when you're finished.
Bryson knelt and gave her a quick hug before she disappeared down the hall. Several of the women whispered. An older woman dressed in a pantsuit came out of the door labeled office. "You must be Jolene's new foster parents." I braced myself for another conversation like I'd had with the guidance counselor. "We're helping out. My aunt is her official foster parent. I'm Tessa, and this is—" "You must be Bryson," the woman practically gushed. "I'm Lynn. We spoke on the phone."
I am.
He offered his hand. She shook it and didn't let go.
It's very nice to meet you both. It's awful what happened to her, but we're so glad she's back. Jolene's one of our rising stars."
I risked a glance at the parents in the room. Judging from their expressions, they didn't share Lynn's enthusiasm. A male voice, reminiscent of a 70s television announcer, filled the room.
"You must be Bryson. Nice to put a face to the voice, and my, what a face. Have you ever considered modeling?"
I grinned like an idiot. I was used to Bryson receiving more than his fair share of admiration from both sexes. That didn't bother me. That he'd obviously spent a heck of a lot of time on the phone with these two made my maternal time clock explode. I wanted his baby, and I wanted it right then.
"Oh, you're a pretty one. I would love to get both of you in front of agents."
The man kissed the back of my hand.
"I'm Patrick Price, Jolene's pageant coach."
"Tessa Lamar, nice to meet you." My face heated, and I just knew that I'd turned red from the tips of my ears to my chest.
"We have much to discuss. The Little Miss Sunshine Glitz Spectacular is right around the corner. It's the last stop until Junior Miss Florida. Tell me you have her costumes."
"Not yet, but I'm working on it." He pressed his hand to his chest.
"Honey, I have to know today if she needs new costumes. These things take weeks to create."
I glanced at Bryson, then back to Patrick. "I'll make some calls while she's in class."
Good, good. I'll go through wardrobe and put the seamstress on standby just in case."
He gave Bryson one last appraising look, then turned and walked back into the office with Lynn on his heels. I lowered my voice. "The trailer is about 5 minutes away. You stay here. I'll go see if the landlord's in his office." I'd expected him to argue, but he turned and watched Jolene tapping her heart out on the television monitor.
"Call Aaron and ask him to meet you there."
I nodded, though I doubted Aaron would take kindly to me going anywhere near the Wagner Parks trailer. He tucked a loose curl behind my ear.
"Promise me you won't go inside."
"I promise." Chapter 32. With 45 minutes to get back to the dance studio, I didn't have a second to spare. I hopped in Bryson's Range Rover, put my phone on speaker, and dialed Aaron's cell.
"Hey, Tessa. Are we still on for tonight?"
He sounded like 5 pounds of crap shoved into a 2-pound bag. "Absolutely. I have to get through dinner with Darlene and Stone, and then I'm all yours." I hated that he'd missed dinner, but until we dealt with Christina Hayes, he couldn't be near Jolene. I'll bring you a doggy bag.
That's not necessary. I just left Maze. She sent me home with enough to feed an army.
He went silent for a few heartbeats.
I stopped by to see you.
Bryson and I took Jolene to dance class. My darned emotions threatened to get the better of me for the second time. It'd look suspicious if I showed up at the rental office with ugly cry face, so I swallowed past the lump in my throat. I have a huge favor to ask. I need to find out what happened to Jolene's clothes. I'm on my way to speak to the landlord. Can you meet me?
Tessa,
Oh, boy. I knew that tone in his voice. I'm not going in the trailer. I'm hoping he packed up the family's belongings.
I'm betting he threw them out.
Probably, but I have to try. I turned into the trailer park and eased the SUV beside the building labeled rental office. I'm here. I'll just go inside and ask. Aaron's tone hardened.
You do not have authorization to go inside that trailer.
Not on police business, but if her clothes are still inside,
I'd hate to have to arrest you.
he sounded serious. You wouldn't do that. It'd ruin our plans for tonight. I hung up before he could reply. The area around the office smelled like cat pee and cigarettes, but the man standing in the doorway had an aroma all his own. I tried to smile and breathe through my mouth, but the sour odor clung to the back of my throat. I knew that smell. I'd encountered it at the death scene. Decay and rot. He motioned to the SUV.
Them some fancy wheels to be looking for a place here. What do you want?
I wished I'd waited for Aaron. The man flat out gave me the creeps. I'm Jolene Park's foster mother. I was hoping to find out what happened to her clothing. A flash of anger crossed his eyes.
There weren't nothing worth nothing left in that trailer. And if there were, I'd have sold it to pay back rent.
On the contrary, there were a few nice things inside when I'd gone in with Aaron. Was there a burglary?
Damned if I know.
Did you report it to the police? He tensed.
We had enough police around here. Ain't nothing they could do about it no way.
I went from creeped out to downright suspicious. I'll let social services know the trailer was broken into. He ground his teeth.
Go talk to Roxanne, the next door neighbor. If anyone knows anything, it's her.
Thank you. Is that the trailer on the right or... He slammed the door. All righty then. I slid into the SUV and drove to Jolene's former home. I'd picked up my phone to tell Aaron about the break-in and landlord when a woman approached the vehicle.
You looking for someone?
The woman set her hands on her hips. I gave her a quick once-over. Red jeans, the same color as her hair. Black top, too small. Mid-40s, slim build, huge chest. Are you Roxanne?
Who's asking?
She pulled a cigarette and lighter from her bra. I'm Jolene Park's foster parent. I was hoping to find out what happened to her clothes. The woman smirked and slid the cigarette back into its hiding place.
I'm Roxanne, or Roxy, and it's your lucky day.
I slung my purse over my shoulder and opened the door. I'm Tessa. She motioned for me to follow her.
You look familiar.
Oh, great. She probably knows me from the news coverage of the psychic working for the Orange County PD. I shrugged. I have one of those faces.
I don't think so.
Roxy led me to her trailer. The skin between my shoulder blades itched, like someone was watching me. I turned and studied the windows in Jolene's trailer. It skeeves me out, too. She motioned for me to go inside. If I didn't know better, I'd say Ben still haunts the place. I choked on a laugh. From what I've heard about him, you might be right. That's it. That's where I know you. You're a cop. She smiled like she'd answered the winning question on Jeopardy. You were inside the trailer with that hot cop. What's his name? Burns. Like a damned fire, that one. Woo! Set a woman's panties on fire. I laughed before I could stop myself. Part of me wanted to tell her Aaron was my fiancé, but I hesitated, unsure if I should stick to business. I don't usually go for cops. You know, most of them aren't my type. But Detective Burns... She fanned herself. I decided to go with honesty. He's my fiancé. I'm also a victim's advocate for the OCPD. We were here shortly after the murders on police business. Roxy turned as red as her jeans and matching hair. It's okay. He is really easy on the eyes. I nudged her. Do you know what happened to Jolene's things? Roxy narrowed her eyes and leaned in like we were old friends. Is he as good in bed as I imagined? I should have been offended she'd asked such a personal question, but all I could manage was a nod. Damn! You go, girl! Roxy shook her head. I have JoJo's stuff. I figured someone might need it. I'd have saved more, but I had to get out of there. Something ain't right in that place. I ran my hands over my arms. I know what you mean. I couldn't wait to get outside. She motioned to the couch. Can you stay for a minute? There's some things you should know. I glanced at my watch and sat. I have to be back at the dance studio at 4, but I have a few minutes to chat. I told Jenny, JoJo's mama, he'd kill her one day. She didn't listen. She perched on the arm of a chair. Of course, he wasn't always that way. He was as nice as could be when they first moved in. In grad school, I'd learned about the cycle of abuse, and I'd counseled enough survivors to know that most abusers had a charming side. How long did they live there? Let's see. JoJo was 2, going on 3 when they moved in. She fidgeted with her hair. Pretty little thing, but she was always different. Not wanting to waste precious time discussing Jolene's differences, I asked, how did he treat the girl? Like a little princess. They spent every dime they had on those pageants of hers, and she won. Time and time again, she won. Jenny put all the winnings into a college fund. Then, Ben lost his job. That's when the fighting started. Over the money? Roxy tapped a manicured nail to her lips. No, over Ben's brother. He came to stay with them, but Jenny didn't like the way he looked at Jolene. Her and the girl stayed with me. Don't get me wrong, she did me a favor. How so? Roxy went a little gooey-eyed. I was seeing someone. It gave me an excuse to break things off. He went away for a few years, did some, soul searching. He came back a couple of months ago, and things are good. Real good. Everything happens for a reason, they say. I must have given her a weird look because she flustered. Oh, I don't mean what happened to Jenny and Jolene. No, I meant good stuff. I hadn't come to get into a philosophical discussion, nor did I care to hear about Roxy's love life. I forced a smile and took control of the conversation. How long did they stay here? A little over a month. They left when Ben finally threw him out, but things were never the same with them. Benjamin Wagner had a brother. My heart hammered. Could he be the connection between Jolene and Christina? Was Ben Wagner's brother the serial killer? Could he have killed Mr. Wagner? Roxy's eyes widened. You don't know, do you? I'm sorry? Her voice lowered as if she shared a filthy secret. Jolene killed him. I shook my head. The police ruled her out. There's no way someone her size could have. I'll get you those boxes. Roxy stood and hurried down the hall. Chapter 33. I left the trailer park with 3 boxes and 2 garment bags containing what was left of Jolene's life, and more questions than I had answers. When I'd agreed to see Jolene as a patient, I'd told myself it didn't matter if she'd killed her stepfather. Until 5 minutes ago, I'd honestly believed it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered. Not that I thought for a minute that little girl wielded those scissors, but the spirit haunting her was an entirely different matter. Bryson and Jolene stepped outside when I pulled into the parking lot. I cut the ignition and stepped out of the SUV.
Everything okay?
Bryson grabbed my waist to steady me. We'll talk later. I turned and smiled at the girl. Miss Roxy saved your clothes and a few of your things. Yay! Jolene hugged me. Thank you. You're very welcome. I walked to the passenger's side on shaking legs. Bryson studied me across the console.
You sure you're up for dinner at May's?
I'll be fine. I wondered how many times I'd said that over the previous few days. He opened his mouth to speak, but my cell phone interrupted him. I glanced at the screen and mouthed, "It's Aaron." Bryson nodded and started the rover. Hello?
How'd it go?
Thankfully, Aaron sounded less frustrated than the last time we'd spoken. The neighbor had some of her things. He chuckled, likely remembering Roxanne. God knows the woman had probably flirted herself silly.
Anything you can read?
I hadn't considered that. Ben Wagner had chased us out of Jolene's room before I had a chance to try. Haven't looked yet, but I will tonight.
Bring it with you.
He hesitated, then rushed on.
I mean, it'd be good to do it at my place, away from the girl, in case you get overwhelmed.
That hasn't happened in a while. I puzzled over his reaction. What did he care where I did the reading?
I know, but there are fewer distractions at my place.
You're right. I'll see you later.
Bye, Tessa.
He disconnected. Was that Mr. Aaron? Jolene's voice pulled me out of my confusion. Yes. I turned to face her. She chewed her bottom lip. Bryson said,
I watched you dance. Could you teach me some of those moves?
Jolene shrugged. I forced a smile. Don't let him fool you. He's a great dancer. She whispered, I'm sorry about Mr. Aaron. I hadn't spoken to her about Christina's demands, or even tried to learn how much Jolene knew about what happened when the spirit took over her body. You have no reason to apologize. She lowered her chin. You can't see your sweetheart because of me, and you miss him. I hesitated to ask her outright what Christina had told her about Aaron for fear of repercussions from the damned ghost. Bryson saved me the trouble.
Did Christina tell you why she doesn't want him to visit? Or did you hear her conversation with Tessa?
I'm still there. When she's in me? Jolene's voice cracked. I closed my eyes, imagining the little girl watching helplessly as the spirit hurt people. I hope you understand that Aaron didn't hurt Christina. I know, she whispered. Brasson parked beside our house and turned in his seat.
Jojo, are you okay to go to Miss May's for dinner? We'll understand if you don't feel up to meeting new people.
It was wrong. I knew it was, but I prayed the girl would give us an excuse to skip out on supper with Darlene. My nerves couldn't handle it. I should have taken the out when Bryson had offered it to me. She perked up. It'll be fun. My shoulders slumped. If I didn't know better, I'd have sworn the ghost had read my mind and saw this as another way to torture me. We walked into Grandma May's house as Dottie put a big pot of chili goulash onto the table. She waved at the girl, then locked eyes with me and frowned. In all my years, I'd never received such a greeting from my aunt. She was either mad as hell or something else had happened. Have you heard from Dr. Alexander about the baby? Dottie went to the stove for the cornbread. He's doing much better today. Malcolm says he's responding well to the antibiotics. Partly relieved, partly perplexed about the bee in her bonnet, I motioned to the front room. Do you need to speak to me? Not yet. I'll let you know when I'm ready. Uh-oh, Tessa Marie is in trouble. Darlene came around the corner wearing a whole lot of stretchy material and a huge grin. A grin that broadened when she noticed the little girl hiding behind Bryson's legs. Why, hello there. You must be Jolene. Yes, ma'am. The child glanced up at her knight in shining armor. Bryson squeezed her shoulder.
This is Darlene, Tessa's mom.
She eyed Darlene with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Nice to meet you. Aren't you a pretty little thing? My goodness, when Tessa was your age, she was all knees and elbows. We couldn't keep her hair brushed, and she always had skinned-up knees. She reminded me of that Pippi Longstocking from the movies.
I bet she was adorable.
Bryson kissed my cheek. Grandma May came into the kitchen with a red-faced TJ in tow. Enough chit-chat. Dinner's getting cold. TJ waved at Jolene and slunk to the table. Lord, May, tell me you didn't wash his mouth out with Ivory soap before dinner? Darlene set her hand on her baby bump. Don't take the Lord's name in vain in my house, young lady. And no, I didn't. I gave him a talking to about proper language. Grandma took her seat and stared at the rest of us until we all sat. Bryson, say grace. TJ raised his hand. Grandma, may I say grace? I'm feeling inspired. My great-grandmother patted the boy's shoulder. You go right ahead. I'm sure Bryson won't mind. Dear Lord, thank you for the goulash and cornbread. Thank you for giving us Jolene and chocolate cake for dessert. Mostly, thank you for forgiving me for saying bad words and for Grandma not using the soap. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. I'd given similar thanks a few times in my lifetime. Grandma might be a little old lady, but she ruled her house with a big stick and ivory soap. Where's Stone? Darlene said, Oh, he's out with the boys. He should have been out with the boys the night of your baby shower. Grandma put a piece of cornbread on her plate and passed it on. Darlene surprised me when she laughed instead of arguing. You're telling me if I ever have another baby, I'm banning men from the shower? She winked at Bryson. No offense.
None taken.
He scooped a helping of goulash onto Jolene's plate, then helped himself. When should we plan on a bridal shower? Grandma took a bite and chewed like she was taking out her frustration on the food. We haven't set a date yet. My mother turned her attention to me. I braced myself for incoming cannon fire. I knew the look in her eyes. She'd toss me in front of a speeding train to get the attention off herself. Darlene patted my hand. I thought it'd be best to wait until Tessa has her big day. I choked on my sweet tea. She hadn't blasted me with meanness. She'd surprised the heck out of me. Bryson said,
Well then, we should set a date. How does the first Saturday in May sound?
Okay, maybe she had thrown me under that train after all. We'll have to talk to the tribal elders, and Aaron, of course. But, Mama, don't wait on our account. Why don't y'all do a double wedding like they do on TV? TJ glanced between us. That's not real. There's only one bride and one groom in a wedding. Jolene seemed to realize what she'd said and went wide-eyed. Except you can have two grooms. TJ laughed. Not when me and you get married. I'm a one-man, one-woman kind of guy. Jolene's mouth fell open. Graham May ruffled his hair. That may be. But you have a long time before you need to be thinking about marriage. I can't have a double wedding with Tessa because I want her to be my maid of honor. Darlene met my gaze. You're my best friend. Will you stand up with me? I stared, wondering what in the world had happened to my mother and who was this alien life form sitting beside me. We'd had our differences. Heck, we'd never gotten along. But I shared some of the blame for the strain in our adult relationship. Truth was, I'd fought so hard to become something different than her that I'd never taken the time to actually get to know her. I took her hand. I'd love to, Mama. Thank you, baby girl. My mom stood and pulled me into a hug. Don't think you're off the hook, Bryson. Stone and I want you to officiate the wedding. Aaron's ringtone, I shot the sheriff, interrupted the moment. I better take that. He wouldn't call during dinner if it wasn't important. I pulled away from her and headed outside. Hi, Aaron.
Sorry to interrupt your family dinner, but I need you on the scene. There's been another murder.
Chapter 34. I drove past the suburbs of Orlando and into the deep south. Most people thought of Miami or Jacksonville or Disney World when they thought of Florida. Then again, most people never ventured too far from the cities or off the interstates. Family dinner, I muttered to myself, as if he wasn't a part of the family. He's under a lot of stress. He needs sleep. He probably hasn't eaten any real food. He needs to blow off steam. Excuse after excuse rolled through my mind, but none of them made me feel better about facing Aaron at yet another murder scene. I turned onto a dirt road and sent up a prayer of thanks that I'd taken Bryson's SUV. The undercarriage of my sports car would have taken a beating on the loose gravel. Marked and unmarked police cars lined the sides of the road, along with the mobile command post. I put the Rover in reverse, backed several yards from the commotion, and parked. Memories of the last death scene flashed unwelcome through my head. I couldn't afford another snafu with a ghost, and neither could Aaron. Sitting in the dark SUV, I closed my eyes and coaxed my spirit animal to the surface. The heat from the Firebird warmed my skin, sharpened my vision, and more importantly, shifted my focus from that of a woman to a predator. I fished my phone from my purse to call Aaron, but he called before I could dial. Hi, Aaron. I'm here.
No shit. Your magic about knocked me on my ass.
I cringed. Not that bad language offended me. but his tone took me off guard. Of course, he had spent a lot of time with Samuels and the other detectives lately. Still, it was no excuse. Nice. Do you intend to kiss me with that mouth later?
The way things are going, there won't be a later. At least not tonight. Hang on.
A rustling sound came over the line, followed by a muffled conversation.
Sit tight. I don't have clearance for you yet. The chief's here. I'll come get you after I talk to him.
Okie dokie. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. Buzzing with magic from head to toenail, I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel. If I didn't do something to release the energy, my hair could catch fire, as in actual flames. Or worse, I could lose control and shift into the Firebird. While I loved flying, I didn't think a bright burning bird shooting across the night sky would go over well on a crime scene. I glanced in the vanity mirror to check my lip gloss and caught sight of the boxes in back. 3 boxes, 2 bags. From the looks of them, they contained mostly clothing. It wouldn't take long to rummage through them. Besides, on the rare instances the chief visited crime scenes, the man didn't exactly stand around and sip lattes. It could be a long while before Aaron had his attention, and longer to convince him to allow me inside the perimeter, especially considering what happened last time. I popped the back hatch, hopped out of the Rover, and got to work. The garment bags contained 2 sequined dresses, a sailor outfit, a pale blue gown, and a leather get-up that I'd die before I allowed Jolene to wear in public. I grinned, imagining Bryson's reaction to the itty-bitty biker babe costume. I opened the first box and removed a quilt and several stacks of clothing. Pink. Lots of pink and denim. The fabric reeked of cigarette smoke. Everything would need a good washing before Jolene could wear it. The second box contained rhinestone-studded crowns, each wrapped in tissue paper. Hoping to catch a vision of Ben Wagner's murder, I ran my finger over the shiny metal along the inside of the band, and got nothing. I removed 4 trophies from the box and set them to the side. Inch by inch, I searched the metal surfaces. I caught a flash of Jenny Wagner, alive. A flash of Ben Wagner, also alive. Images of Jolene rolled through me. A lonely little girl, playing with her not-so-imaginary friend in her room. Her mother reading her bedtime stories. Her stepfather's voice booming through the trailer, and the fear it caused. I watched as the girl hid in her closet or under her comforter or under the bed. Sounds of a struggle filled the air, along with the meaty sounds of flesh hitting flesh. A woman crying, a man shouting. On and on it went. I pulled my shaking hand from the trophy and turned my face toward heaven. No more, baby girl. No one will hurt you like that ever again. Shame threatened to buckle my knees. I'd spent a good deal of my life feeling sorry for myself. Darlene had shuffled me from house to house, school to school, stepdad to stepdad. But mostly, she'd left me with Dottie and Charlie. I'd seen the bruises on her body when she'd come to visit. I'd heard the way the men in her life spoke to her. Even at a young age, I knew it was wrong. But I'd longed for her to be a mother. My mother. How much worse would my life have been had she not left me in Charlie and Dottie's loving arms? Darlene had protected me, the only way she knew how. Oh, Mama, I've been so wrong. I promised myself I'd be the best daughter, bridesmaid, and big sister I could, wiped my eyes, and got back to work. I pulled a plastic bin the size of a loaf of bread from the box.
Ready to roll?
Aaron knocked on the side of the SUV and scared the daylights out of me. The container slipped. I somehow managed to catch the lid, and only the lid. Jolene's family photos scattered at our feet.
Sorry. I thought you saw me coming.
He knelt to help me get the pictures back in the bin. These were in the box I picked up from Jenny Wagner's next-door neighbor. The landlord said there was a burglary, but she managed to get into the trailer and save some of Jolene's clothes and keepsakes.
Did he report it?
I shook my head. No, he doesn't want police around. Have you looked into him? He gave me the creeps, and he smelled like a corpse.
He has an alibi the night of the Wagner murders.
What about the dead girls? He might...
Poor hygiene and giving you the creeps doesn't make someone a suspect.
Aaron tossed a handful of photos in the bin. I brushed the dirt from a picture and dropped it in the bin. What about Ben Wagner's brother? The neighbor said he stayed with the couple for a while. She told me Jenny Wagner moved in with her because of the way the brother looked at Jolene. Roxanne seemed to think the problem started when the brother arrived. Aaron, are you listening to me? He stood and held a photograph under the light inside the vehicle. I'd seen the look on his face once before, when he realized Christina Hayes was the ghost haunting Jolene. What is it? My chest tightened.
Nothing.
He shoved the picture into his shirt pocket.
I need to get you on the scene. We're wasting time.
I pushed Jolene's things deeper inside the SUV and closed the hatch. I'd need to repack before driving, but they'd keep for now. It didn't look like nothing. Let me see it.
It's a cleaner photo of the Wagners than the ones we have in evidence. It'll come in handy for the prosecutors, that is, if we get this guy. But we won't get him standing here shooting the shit. Are you coming or not?
I pushed down my hurt feelings and latched onto my frustration. Aaron Burns, I know you're stressed out, but I will not have you speaking to me like that. It's unprofessional and uncalled for.
Telling Samuels about Dottie fostering Jolene was uncalled for. Asking him to sneak you into the trailer was uncalled for. Announcing you wanted to have Brasson's...
He raked his hand through his hair.
You should go.
His anger and the accusations, though mostly true, left me breathless. They had come at me so fast I couldn't process the information quick enough to form the words needed to defend myself. Screw you. I'm here. I'm doing my damned job. I pushed past him and marched toward the mobile command center. Aaron grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a bruise.
This is my murder scene. I say who is and is not allowed in it.
I jerked free. I believe the chief still outranks you. Aaron threw his hands up, turned, and walked away. Tears stung my eyes, but not the sad kind, the angry kind, which pissed me off even more because no one could tell the difference. They'd see a girl crying at a death scene and assume she couldn't handle the stress. I squared my shoulders and walked into the staging area to suit up. A large hand clamped my shoulder.
Lamar, you're with me.
Sure thing, Samuels. I tucked my hair under the paper cap and snapped on a pair of gloves. Aaron's partner stared until I looked away. We had an argument. He's taken a minute to cool off. I motioned to the tape marking the perimeter. Anything I need to know, or am I going in blind?
Stay within a foot of the tape or on the stepping plates.
He dipped his chin.
And I'm sorry.
Don't apologize. You were looking out for Aaron. I can't be upset with you about that. Samuel signed in with the officer men in the entrance.
Do your thing, Lamar. I'll be close.
I took 3 steps forward and came toe-to-toe with the spirit of a blonde-haired little girl. She looked like an angel, but her eyes, the horror in her eyes would haunt me for the rest of my life. I squatted in front of her. "My name is Tessa. I can help you." The girl tilted her head to the side. "He's here." "Who?" I glanced around the area. A dozen or so police officers, detectives, and techs moved inside the perimeter, plus a dozen or so more worked in or around the Moby. "The bad man?" She pointed deeper into the forest. My brain skidded to a halt. The girl turned and drifted toward the tent covering the body. Her body. "Wait, what color is his shirt? What does he look like?" I took 2 steps, but stopped when Samuels walked to my side.
You got something?
He studied my face with cold, calculating cop eyes. "The killer's in the woods." Chapter 35.
Stay here.
Samuels headed in the direction of the tent. The absolute last thing I intended to do was to stand there and wait for orders. Orders that would take too long and not involve me. I ducked under the police tape marking the boundary of the crime scene. Jogging toward the tree line, I removed the paper cap, gloves, and protective suit. My clothes were a problem. I could strip and leave them in the woods, but I'd run the risk of an officer finding them. My other option was quicker and left less evidence. I brought the Firebird to the surface and picked up speed. Once I'd cleared the ring of artificial light, I let my spirit animal free. 1 second I ran on 2 legs, the next I flew. Over the previous months, I'd learned to shift into the Firebird without actual fire. However, I needed to destroy my clothing, badge, and anything that could identify me as the owner. Otherwise, I'd have a heck of a lot of explaining to do. My feathers blazed. The preternatural heat incinerated my belongings in a jiff, but the flames drew unwanted attention. Voices followed me on my ascent. 2 people below would know the source of the flames, Aaron and Samuels. I'd catch hell for it later, but neither would rat me out. Not when it would mean losing credibility with their peers. Breaking through the treetops, I extinguished my flames. I blinked several times to adjust to the changes in my vision and scanned the ground below. Where is he? Nocturnal animals, mostly rodents, scurried beneath me. Unlike humans who primarily used their eyes to sense the world, animals seemed to feel danger in their bones. They couldn't see, hear, smell, or taste the predator above them, but they sure as heck felt me. I set up an imaginary circular search grid in the air. Starting with a small ring close to the scene, I flew in increasingly wide arcs. Round and round, farther and farther from the center point I hunted. Movement, too awkward to be an animal, caught my attention. I swooped lower to get a visual on the human. A man. Increased heart rate. Increased body heat. He was spooked, or he'd exerted himself. I'd put my money on both. I debated my next move. I could swoop down and light him up, but I had no way of knowing if he was the killer. No one had made me judge, jury, and executioner. I could detain him in a ring of fire until the officers caught up, but I had to assume he carried a weapon. Circling at a low altitude would make me an easy target.
Stop! Police!
Someone shouted. Weaving between the trees, the man increased his speed. He stopped at a clearing, glanced over his shoulder, and darted to the right. The officers below continued to pursue, but rather than veering to the side, they charged into the open. The man raised a gun. My pulse hammered. No, no, no. I screeched and dove for him. He glanced heavenward and covered his head with his arms. To draw attention to the man, I cried out again. Extending my legs, I raked my talons across his flesh. The impact slowed me down, but I beat my wings to gain altitude. One of the officers below called,
"There, armed. Get down."
The man had recovered quicker than I'd hoped. I dropped low and went in for a second attack. 3 shots rang out. I had a millisecond of understanding. The jerk had shot at me. No, he'd shot me. Pain tore through my side. Small miracle he'd missed my wings, but otherwise, I had no idea what sort of damage he'd done. I knew it hurt like a bitch and I was losing blood. The man scanned the sky, turned and ran. One officer was sprawled out on his back while the other called for help. I could sense others nearby. Likely the gunshots had drawn them in my direction. Good for the wounded officer, but for me, not so much. Not when I looked like a cross between a hawk and a bird of paradise, and certainly not when one of those officers and I shared a bond that allowed him to sense my presence. Aaron would know I was wounded. Given his mood lately, I didn't imagine my running after a child killer would go over very well, bullet in my side or not. Okay, Tessa, you got yourself into this mess. You can get yourself out of it. I pushed past my pain and flew to the next tree. And the next. And the next. With a few small victories under my belt, I flew several yards through a clearing and alighted near a stream. Aaron's energy pressed closer. I took a few sips of water and launched myself onto a low branch. Bit by bit, I made my way toward the road, with my mate tracking my every move. I reached the SUV and the end of my strength at the same time. I crawled under the vehicle and waited. The pain in my side had lessened to a throbbing ache, but I struggled to stay alert. I may be a mythical creature, but the other predators in the woods didn't know that. They'd see an injured bird as an easy meal. I would rise from the dead like a phoenix, but I'd be damned if I'd let some coyote tear me to shreds.
"Tessa?"
Aaron's voice pulled me back from my morbid thoughts. I chirped twice, but the sounds of footfalls and voices likely drowned it out.
"Is she here?"
Samuel sounded more alarmed than my mate. Then again, he didn't have a connection to me. He had no way to know if I was alive or dead.
"Where's Lamar?"
Another male asked. His voice held authority and a slight hint of a Boston accent. The chief.
"I saw her come this way,"
Aaron said.
"Samuels and I will find—" "No. Samuels will rejoin the search for the shooter. You will take the rest of the night to get your head in the game."
The chief walked away.
"You sure she's here?"
Samuel's voice lowered. I stretched my wing out from under the SUV and focused my remaining magic on setting the feathers ablaze. A big lighter would have had better results. Aaron dropped to the ground beside the vehicle.
"She's here."
Samuels muttered a slew of curses that would have sent Grandma running for the ivory soap.
"Hey, beautiful. Can you shift for me?"
I stared as Aaron's face went in and out of focus. He eased me out from beneath the vehicle and cradled me against his chest.
"She's bleeding. Do you need to take her to the vet?" "I got her. Get back to work before Chief chews your ass, too."
Aaron settled me in the front seat of his car and drove with one hand on my side. The physical contact with my mate helped to clear my head, which had a negative effect on my pain level. The more I came back to consciousness, the more it freaking hurt.
Tessa, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm sorry. You're right. I've been an ass.
I closed my eyes and focused on his voice and his touch. The car's control panel beeped twice, and Aaron said,
Call Bryson.
The call connected, and the sound of ringing came through the speakers, followed by Bryson's voice.
Thank God. What's happened to Tessa?
She's injured, but alive.
Injured how?
Bryson sounded as if he'd crawl through the stereo system and strangle both of us.
Gunshot. But it looks like a Graves. She saved 2 lives tonight. Is she conscious? Yeah, but she can't shift back to normal.
Bryson drew a breath.
I was on my way to find her when you called. Where are you? On my way to you. No. She needs both of us. I'll meet you at your place.
Aaron's voice hardened.
What about the kid? Dottie's here with her. You think that's a good idea?
Bryson all but growled.
I'll be there in 5 minutes.
Aaron disconnected and glanced at me.
Tessa, you're the strongest woman I know. You saved those officers. You took an orphaned girl into your home. Hell, you've somehow managed to make sense of your crazy, effed up life. I'll always love you. Can't do this.
Fading in and out, I struggled to make sense of his words. He'd complimented me, and was he dumping me? Now? At some point during the drive, I must have passed out. I came to when Aaron lifted me into his arms. Bryson hovered close by, but I barely had the strength to keep my eyes open, let alone turn my head.
Put her on the table. I need to see the wound,
Bryson said.
Why isn't she shifting back?
He set me down.
She will.
Bryson stretched my right wing and then my left before running his fingertips from my neck to my chest and abdomen. He repeated the process down my back.
You're right. The bullet grazed her.
Good to be right about something, he murmured. Bryson stepped away from the table.
What the hell are you doing?
Aaron's voice rose.
Shifting. She'll respond better to my spirit animal. Great.
Aaron turned for the door.
You two do the bird thing. I'll be in the shower.
I felt Bryson's energy change before he spoke.
Sit down.
They rarely, if ever, argued, but Aaron rarely, if ever, behaved like a complete jerk. Our relationship was strapped to the tracks, and I watched, helpless to say or do anything to stop the barreling train.
I'll help, but you're taking her home when we're done. I can't do this anymore. I can't heal her. I can't keep her safe. Hell, I can't even set foot in your house.
Aaron's voice quivered, letting me know beneath all that anger was a mountain of hurt. Please stop fighting.
She needs both of us. You don't get it. But why would you? You two belong together. I'm just the human who got in the way.
Aaron's laughter sounded harsh, like crumpling metal.
Tell me how to help. Then I need you to leave.
Chapter 36. The sun rose right on time, but it did nothing to thaw the cold lump in my chest. I cradled my coffee cup with both hands, hoping the warmth would seep inside me. Bryson and Aaron had healed my wound and lent me enough of their magic to shift back to human form. Afterward, Bryson had brought me home, but without the third piece of our puzzle, it would take time for the Firebird to return to normal. Bryson looked as if he'd aged 10 years overnight. The laugh lines around his eyes had deepened, and his skin had taken on a yellow tinge. He'd smiled and said the right things, but I knew his heart wasn't in it. How could it be when it was as broken as mine? The house phone interrupted my pity party. Hello?
Lamar, is that you?
The chief's voice made my stomach clench. Yes, sir?
I've been trying to reach you on your cell.
My phone was incinerated along with my clothing the night before. The battery must be dead.
What happened to you last night? Samuel said you had a tip the perp was in the area and you up and vanished.
He didn't sound happy. Oh. I searched my mind for a plausible explanation, but fell back on the lamest excuse in the book. I had to pee and the Moby was too far.
Let me get this straight. You chose to urinate in the woods with a possible suspect in the area?
I sighed loud enough for him to hear me. Sir, I started my menstrual cycle. It was everywhere.
We had men searching for you because you got your period?
I didn't know they were looking for me. I could almost hear him shaking his head.
10-4, Lamar.
He softened his tone.
And good work on that tip. We found shell casings, clothing fibers, and blood. If there's a match to the samples taken from the Vic, we'll know he likes to stick around to watch.
Bile rose in my throat. That's something, I guess. Aaron said an officer was wounded?
McIntosh. He's recovering. Damnedest thing. A bird came out of nowhere and interrupted the shooter. We got lucky.
I closed my eyes. That's crazy. I'm glad he's okay.
Goodbye, Lamar.
Bye, Chief. I hung up and sank back into my chair. I hadn't used the period excuse since freshman year of college. This day kept getting better and better. Jolene looked up from her math problem. Is it 3/4?
Yes, good job.
Bryson tugged her braid.
Work on the next 5 on your own. I'll check your work when you're finished.
She glanced from him to me and nodded. Yes, sir. Bryson slid into the chair beside me.
We'll get through this.
I forced a smile and lied to him and myself. Aaron will come to his senses once work calms down.
Maybe. But we'll be all right if he doesn't.
I set the mug on the table. You said yourself, mates are for life. I feel like part of my soul is missing. He slung his arm around my shoulder and pulled me close.
Me too. And it's probably the same for him. But he was willing to stand by and let you suffer. That is something I cannot forget.
But he didn't. I eased away. It's my fault. I shouldn't have gone after that man. He pressed his index finger to my lips.
You're right. You shouldn't have. But you aren't responsible for Aaron's actions. He is.
I caught movement on the porch. Someone's here. The bell rang. I'll get it. Jolene bounded from her seat, but Bryson caught up to her in time to open the door. Hello. I'm looking for Dottie Nokosika. I recognized the woman's voice instantly. Mrs. White from the Department of Children and Families. I pulled my robe tighter and hurried to the front room. Hi, Mrs. White. Dottie took my great-grandmother shopping. She should be back in an hour or so. Bryson stepped back.
Would you like to come inside?
Mrs. White glanced between my robe, Bryson, and Jolene. Yes, thank you. I'm here for my monthly visit, and I need to speak to Jolene alone. The room tilted. Had I not been standing near the wall, I would have toppled over. Of course. Is it okay if we sit in the kitchen? Or would you rather us go outside? Jolene latched onto Bryson like he was the last life preserver on the Titanic. I'd heard the expression, looking down your nose at someone, but until that moment, I'd assumed it was a figure of speech. Either is fine, but Miss Lamar, you might want to get dressed before stepping outside. After last night, I could hardly muster a smile. Our nearest neighbor is a mile away, and I wasn't expecting company. The woman narrowed her eyes, then turned and surveyed the room. I thanked my lucky stars that Bryson had taken it upon himself to keep the house clean. Mrs. White smiled at Jolene. Is this where you do your schoolwork? The girl nodded from behind Bryson. We haven't met. She turned her appraising gaze on the man. I'm Hattie White, lead social worker on Jolene's case.
Bryson DeClay. I'm Tessa's fiancé and Jolene's learning coach.
He managed to get the words out without a hint of nerves. That's a big responsibility and time-consuming. What is it you do for a living? I wanted to object to the line of questioning, but we weren't in court and I was pretty sure she could ask anything she dang well pleased.
I'm an artist. A sculptor.
Is that your studio out back?
Yes.
His shoulders tensed. Do you live here, in this house, Mr. DeClay? Bryson glanced down at Jolene, and I knew we were in big trouble. He wouldn't lie in front of the girl.
I spend a considerable amount of time here, but I share a place with a law enforcement officer nearby and own a home in North Carolina.
I see. She bent down and made eye contact with Jolene. Would you come and sit with me for a few minutes? It's my job to make sure you're doing well here. The girl shook her head and held tighter to Bryson. He knelt beside her.
Jojo, it's okay. Mrs. White just needs to ask you a few questions. Tessa and I will be in the kitchen.
Can I do my signal if I get scared? She made a peace sign. He turned to the social worker.
We use the signal if she feels overwhelmed or frightened.
A genuine smile crossed Hattie White's face. I love that idea. Yes, please use it if you need to. Jolene followed the woman to the couch, and Bryson and I went into the kitchen.
Breathe,
he whispered. I can't. What if she asks her if Dottie sleeps here? What if she takes her away? He gave me his full dimpled grin and pressed his forehead to mine.
I'll bespell her into believing she never came here, and we'll do the entire visit over.
I giggled, despite my anxiety. You can't do that.
I can, but I won't. She's not the enemy. We all want what's best for Jolene.
He winked and walked to the counter to pour himself a cup of coffee. Bryson's spine stiffened.
Aaron's here.
My heart did a cartwheel at the thought that he'd come to make up, but the somersault went sideways. Christina Hayes would make a scene in front of Mrs. White. Don't let him inside. Bryson walked into the living room.
Excuse me.
The front door shut, and I hurried to the window. My men stood in the driveway talking, but anyone with eyes could tell the conversation was less than friendly. For the second time, I stood helplessly by while our relationship circled the bowl. Miss Lamar, if I could have a word. The social worker stood in the entrance to the kitchen. Sure. Would you care for some coffee? My voice sounded paper thin. No, this will only take a minute. She set her laser focus on me. Jolene tells me she stays here with you and Mr. DeClay, while Mrs. Nogoseka lives in the other house on the property. Of all the times for Bryson to have stepped out, that's true. Jolene has bonded with him more so than the rest of us. She eats better, behaves better, and sleeps through the night with him here. Mrs. White nodded, but the space between her brows crinkled into 2 lines. I can appreciate that. However, you and Mr. DeClay are not approved as foster parents. What do we need to do to be approved? It's a lengthy process. There is an application, background screenings, home studies. It isn't quick. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I'm sure Dr. Alexander would agree that our current arrangement is most therapeutic, be that as it may. I cannot allow the current living situation to continue. Your aunt will need to physically live in this house. I nodded. We can make that happen. Today. Yes, today. I began to feel like a bobblehead. And since you and Mr. DeClay aren't on Mrs. Nogoseka's application, the 2 of you cannot stay here until an amended application is approved. How long will that? Jolene's screams and the scent of Love's baby soft perfume interrupted me. Get out! You're not supposed to be here! I forced my feet to follow Mrs. White into the living room. I knew what had happened. Aaron had come inside, and Christina Hayes had made an appearance. However, I was not prepared for the scene before me. Bryson stood between the scissor-wielding girl and the stone-faced detective. Blood covered his outstretched arm and hand. Whoever said safety scissors were safe for kids was wrong. Very wrong. Tell him to go. You promised. Tell him to get away from Jojo. The color drained from the social worker's face. Bryson kept his eyes on the girl, but spoke to Aaron.
I need you to go back outside and wait for me.
Aaron's expression turned my blood to ice.
Not until I get the DNA sample.
I pushed past Mrs. White and went to the girl. Careful to stay out of striking range, I held my hands up. I understand you want Detective Burns to leave, but I need you to put the scissors down.
Tessa, move back.
Aaron took a step forward. The girl lunged for him. Bryson caught her wrist and removed the scissors while I moved behind Jolene and wrangled her into a therapeutic hold with her arms crossed in front of her body and my shoulder against her upper back. I shifted my weight and set the girl off balance enough to prevent her from kicking my legs. I met Aaron's gaze. Detective Burns, I need you to go now. He ran his hand over the back of his neck, shook his head, and walked out the front door. Jolene sagged against me. Her uneven breaths morphed into full-fledged sobs. I shifted her position and cradled the girl in my arms. Easy now. Let it out. Mrs. White pressed her hand to her chest. Do you need stitches?
No, it looks worse than it is.
Bryson walked into the kitchen and returned with his hand wrapped in a dishcloth. I'd seen the gash in his palm. It was as bad as it looked. Jolene released me and crawled into Bryson's open arms. I'm sorry.
I accept your apology. We can talk about it later when everyone is calm.
He looked from me to Mrs. White. I stood and faced the woman who held the little girl's future in her hands. She doesn't trust police officers or men, except Bryson. We're working with her on that." Hattie White stared as if she had something to say, but nodded and walked to the door. "I'll be in touch." "Thank you." I followed her onto the porch. Aaron paced a rut in the front yard. When the front door closed, Aaron stopped pacing and looked our way.
"We have a lead on the girl's biological father. I came by to do a buccal swab."
Was he purposely trying to find a way to take Jolene from us? I swallowed past the lump in my throat and held out my hand. "Give it to me. I'll do the swab."
"I need to witness the collection."
He avoided my gaze and handed me the envelope. Mrs. White's expression hardened. I believe Miss Lamar made her feelings quite clear. She doesn't want you in her home. Your presence is upsetting to an already traumatized girl. Unless you have a warrant, and I assume you don't, I'll witness it. His cop face faltered, allowing me a peek at his anguish.
"Thank you."
I walked back inside and tore open the envelope. "Jolene, I need to rub this Q-tip on the inside of your cheek. I promise it won't hurt a bit." For a heartbeat, I thought she'd fight me, but she opened her mouth and allowed me to collect the sample. "Put it in this and seal it." The social worker pressed her lips together and shook her head. Clearly, she did not approve of Aaron's tactics. "I'll take it to the detective. His name is Burns, OCPD." I handed her the plastic baggie with the cotton swab inside. "Yes, ma'am?" "I believe I'll be calling in a report to the station. He was out of line."
"No."
Bryson and I said in unison. Bryson cleared his throat.
"He's the lead detective on the case. He did us a favor by coming here, rather than forcing us to take JoJo to the station."
"Very well." Mrs. White offered her hand to Jolene. "Thank you for talking to me. I enjoyed our conversation." The girl gave her a quick shake. The social worker took one last look around, frowned, and walked outside. I stood in the kitchen window as Mrs. White and Aaron exchanged words. I half expected him to hang around. At least, I hoped he would. He owed me a few minutes of his time and more information about the potential father. But the man I'd promised to share my life with walked to his car and drove away. Chapter 37. Haley and I sat on the porch swing watching TJ and Jolene play fetch with Maddie. The rhythmic motion and familiar creaking of the old chains normally did wonders to ease my tension, but nothing could quiet my growing sense of unease. The ladies had absconded with a healthy and thriving Aiden Scott, and Bryson was around back showing Scott his progress on the addition to the house. It seemed like ages since I had any time with my bestie, but I found myself with nothing to say. Nothing to say that wouldn't lead to taboo topics like magic, spirits, and the situation with Aaron. "When were you going to tell me you and Bryson submitted a foster parent application? And what were you thinking getting Dottie to lie to the social workers? You realize they could have removed Jolene from the home?" Evidently, Haley had no shortage of things to discuss. I panicked. The address was wrong on the application. We couldn't leave her in the psych ward forever. I chewed the cuticle on my thumb. "I'm glad you're setting things straight. It's been 10 days since Mrs. White did the last home visit. Do you have any idea when to expect her again? They have to visit once a month, more often if there's an issue." She shifted to face me. "My father told me Dottie's sleeping here again. Where are you and Bryson staying?" I groaned. Dottie comes here at 10 o'clock. Bryson and I go to Graham May's. He's sleeping in my childhood bedroom, and I'm bunking with my great-grandmother." Haley erupted in laughter, clenched her stomach, and did her best to settle down. But every time she looked in my direction, she giggled again. "I don't know which is funnier, that massive man sleeping in a twin bed, or May cock-blocking the two of you. Ha ha. I saw the humor in the situation. I did, but that didn't mean I had to like it. Why aren't you two sleeping at Aaron's?" I glanced at the kids. "He broke up with us." "What? No." She slung her arm around my shoulder. "I saw the way he looked at you when you were holding the baby in the hospital. That man loves you. What happened?" I'd planned to avoid this conversation, as well as mine and Bryson's decision to adopt Jolene, but dang it, I needed someone to talk to. "He doesn't want a family, and we do." Her expression went from concern to shock. "You and Bryson want a baby?" I nodded. "You want a baby?" She poked my side. "Miss, I hate kids. I never said I hated kids." She hugged me so tight I lost my breath. "This is amazing. Have you started to try to conceive?" I pulled away and deadpanned, "Unmarried while sleeping under Grandma May's roof? Good point." She tapped her fingers to her lips. "Hire a babysitter and get busy in a hotel room. We're not in a hurry. We want to make things final with Jolene first." Her eyebrows climbed into her hairline. "Final, as in the foster application." My hands trembled. Somehow, telling someone outside of my family made it seem very real. "Bryson and I plan to adopt her." "Are you sure?" Haley stared at the girl. "She's had a very difficult start in life, which is why we want to keep her. Tessa, she's violent." Bryson blew it off, but I know she injured his hand. I saw the bandages. She shook her head. "I don't think it's a good idea. In fact, I'd strongly advise against it if you plan to have children of your own." Some of the air seeped out of my joy balloon. "She's fine with my cousin TJ. TJ doesn't live in the same house. You've seen her file. She doesn't do well with other kids." Haley turned and folded her arms. "I'd love for Aiden Scott to spend more time with his godparents, but I'm terrified of having him around her." We'd been friends for years, and I could count on one hand the number of times we'd argued. I'd never experienced such a desperate need to defend and protect another living being in my life. "You're wrong." "Am I?" She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Is this what caused Aaron to end things?" "He's wrong, too." I stood and paced the front porch. "Tessa, when the people who care about you express concern, we do it because we care enough to worry. Don't shut me out." "It's getting late. I should get Jolene inside. She has school tomorrow." Haley narrowed her eyes. "Home school? I don't think Bryson's going to give her a tardy slip." I squared my shoulders. "I know you mean well, but you don't know her like we do. While I respect your professional opinion in the office, you're in my home, insulting me, my fiancé, and the child we already consider ours." "Spoken like a real mom." "Just think about what I said." She squeezed my hand, stood, and walked around the side of the house. "Scott, time to go." Grandma May brought the baby outside. Judging from the look on her face she'd overheard most, if not all of my conversation with Haley. Dottie eased onto the swing beside me. You were hard on her. I know. I would accept responsibility for my behavior, but I refused to apologize for speaking the truth as I saw it. She'll come around in time. Dottie patted my thigh. She'd better, because I'm in love with this little guy. Grandma cooed at Aiden Scott. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Haley came out the front door with a diaper bag over her shoulder and a car seat in hand. Think about what I said, Tessa. There's nothing to think about. Bryson and I have made up our minds. She eased the baby from my great-grandmother's arms. May, Dottie, thank you for lunch. It was delicious as always. You're welcome, Grandma said. Perhaps you both need to do some thinking. Haley glanced at me, nodded, and walked down the steps. I watched from the porch as Bryson said goodbye to our guests. A sense of déjà vu washed over me as Scott and Haley drove away. How many more people would walk out of my life because of the girl? Better question, how could they not see she belonged with us?
Want to talk about it?
Bryson sat beside me on the swing. No, I said before launching into an emotional retelling of my conversation with Haley. He ran his fingers through my hair for a few minutes before he said,
Is this really about what she said? Or is it about Aaron?
I opened my mouth to argue, but what was the use? We both knew he was right. I haven't seen hide nor hair of Aaron in 10 days. He's even managed to avoid me at the station.
There is a silver lining. He hasn't contradicted the period excuse you gave the chief.
I pinched his side. This is serious.
I think it's time to talk to Jolene about Christina.
He'd changed the subject so fast it took my brain a minute to catch up. It's past time. But what if we have a repeat of the last time? We could have lost her.
I've been teaching her how to keep the spirits out. She's getting stronger.
Strong enough to keep Christina from possessing her? I hated the idea of ghosts or whatever they were feeding off her.
That I can't answer. I spoke to some of the other medicine men and did some research. The consensus is the two share a symbiotic relationship. Jolene provides fuel for the spirit, and the spirit provides protection. If we eliminate the need for protection, the relationship is broken.
I thought about what he'd said. It made sense to a point, but the girls seemed to honestly care for one another. Are you willing to risk her on a hunch?
No, which is why we need to do some practice runs.
He turned to me.
You and Aaron saw the things feeding off her.
I nodded. Things is a good word for them. I didn't get the sense they were actual human spirits.
We need to convince Christina to step aside and let them come, so you can figure out what they are and how to stop them.
She's smart. She'll see it as us working to get rid of her. I glanced at the children picking dandelions. Jojo seemed like a happy, healthy 9-year-old pageant queen medium.
I'll come up with a plausible reason.
I rested my head on his chest. She's been with us over a month, and we've made no progress. Bryson curled his finger under my chin and turned my face toward his.
She's talking, learning, making friends. She's come a long way in a short amount of time.
You're right. I sat straighter. I hate that I argued with Haley and we're getting nowhere on the murder investigation, and this thing with Aaron is wearing on me. Have you heard from him?
He's not returning my calls.
I hadn't realized that Bryson had reached out to Aaron at all.
Another silver lining. It's been long enough for the paternity tests to have come back. If he found Jolene's biological father, we'd have heard by now.
Maybe. I turned to face him. We still need to do something about Benjamin Wagner's ghost. He wiggled his brows.
That we can do.
We can't get into the trailer without being arrested for trespassing.
Who said anything about going to the trailer?
He stood and stretched.
Let's focus on one problem at a time. Tonight, we talk to Christina. Tomorrow, we take care of Benjamin Wagner.
Don't forget, we still have a by-the-book social worker to deal with and a pageant to survive.
Mrs. White isn't the enemy.
He kissed the tip of my nose. And the pageant?
That's up to Jolene and Patrick.
So you say, but I'm telling you, there'll be more drama backstage and in that auditorium than all 9 seasons of Dynasty. He gave me an odd look.
Dynasty was a little before your time.
Yes, but that's what the internet's for. Grandma and I are halfway through the last season. It's one of the benefits of sharing a room with her. He cocked his head and grinned.
Careful. You sound like you're enjoying sleeping away from me.
I patted his cheek. Don't worry. I'd much rather scorch the sheets with you than watch internet television with my granny. He chuckled and turned to the kids.
TJ, Jolene, time to get cleaned up and come inside.
TJ groaned. The sun's still out. I did my best grandma imitation. No back-talking, young man. Your daddy will be here to pick you up soon. He won't let you in his truck if you're covered in mud. Can I sleep over? TJ flashed me a toothless grin. He's just gonna bring me back here in the morning. Jolene bounded up the stairs and launched herself at Bryson. Please, can TJ sleep over? He laughed and embraced her.
Not tonight.
Watching the two of them together reinforced my decision to raise her as our own. We'd prove Haley, Aaron, and anyone else who stood in our way wrong.
This has been part 3 of the Spirit Child, Tessa Lamar novels, Book 3. Written by Kathryn M. Hearst. Narrated by Holly Adams. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please subscribe to Kathryn's channel where you can find part 4 of The Spirit Child, along with more of Kathryn's paranormal and contemporary romance novels.